Now, the next story we're going to talk about is a medical story, which I have asked Dr. Bob Gill to come on and talk about.
Hi, Crispin.
Hi, Bob. Now, you're a GP in Welling, and I thought that your insight into this would be interesting. There's been this figure that's come out about the use of antidepressants in the country. This is the rising tide of antidepressants prescriptions in England. This is in England, 2011 till 2021. It's gone up at 75%, from 47 million to 83.4 million. Why do you think there's been such a big increase in the use of antidepressants? Is that as a GP, would you say that's because there's more cases of depression? Is it also maybe a case that there's not enough treatment for depression outside of antidepressants? I mean, like therapy, talking therapy. How do you explain this rise?
Thank you, Crispin. Yeah, I think Prem has just set out the conditions, the economic conditions, which are driving this mental health explosion, mental health problem explosion. So our social conditions, the fabric of society, are the main triggers that I'm seeing in my practice for people to come and seek help. The antidepressants, they're not only prescribed for depression, they're prescribed for anxiety, and the multiple factors that are pushing anxiety, predominantly they're economic. But the 40-year class war that Prem was mentioning has destroyed communities. It's pushed people into social isolation. We have precarious workforce. We have the diseases of despair, addiction, alcoholism, drug use. We have the breakdown of the family. Now, those are the conditions that are going to push people into mental turmoil. And then some of them, not all of them, I think we just see the tip of the iceberg, come and seek help from the GP. And we have a decimated mental health service. So, the bar is so high to access secondary psychiatric services or child mental health services. So the GP, in his 10-minute consultation, the easiest thing to do is to prescribe these antidepressants. Now, they're not a wonder drug. The problem is the public are almost conditioned to think a pill will fix their problems, and they're not in the position to address the root cause. And the root cause is the social conditions and the economic conditions. So they come along, they themselves want a tablet to fix how they're feeling. A lot of them might not necessarily want to engage in talking therapies. To engage with the talking therapies, you've got to give up some time from work. Well, if you can't afford to pay the bills, that becomes an obstacle to put time aside to address your mental health problems. But what we have an absolute vacuum in terms of provision is psychotherapy. Now, a lot of what we're seeing, we've had 40 years of Thatcherism, 40 years of neoliberalism, that has caused intergenerational health problems and mental health problems. Because if you have parents who are stressed, parents who are vulnerable, parents who don't know where they're going to be living next week, parents who can't afford to feed their children, well, that's going to have a problem within the family dynamic. You have children who may be getting emotionally or physically neglected. That casts a long shadow. That damage done in childhood then follows on into adulthood, where those people become disconnected, alienated from society, have difficulties forming relationships. And hey presto, we have another generation of people with mental health problems. So unless you look at the root causes, we're not going to get much further on this. We're just going to get an explosion of more and more mental health and depressive illness.
What do the medical authorities, the top medical authorities, think about this trend? I mean, are they alarmed by it or alerted to it? What have they said about this?
Well, I'm not aware that other than reporting what we can all see, they do not I have not seen a critique which goes to the root problem, and the root problem is how the country is run. Just take the medical profession itself, particularly the nursing profession. We have underpaid nurses who are working in an overstretched NHS, who are unable to deliver high quality care. Now, just for 1 minute, think of the psychological toll it takes on individuals working in such an environment. They themselves are damaged by this. They're not robots. They can see the neglect. They can see the unavoidable harm. That takes a toll, and you either become crushed by it. Worst case scenario, you become conditioned to it and you no longer see it, or you leave and look for the door. You look for an exit strategy. So if we cannot look after our own, I don't think, the medical or nursing organizations, the unions have been largely pathetic. It's because of the weakness of the unions. It's because of the complicity of the leaderships that we are in this position. How is it that doctors and nurses have suffered a 20 to 30% real terms pay cut since 2008, whilst the bankers are laughing all the way to their own bank accounts? How has that happened? Prem has clearly outlined that this is a class war. This is an economic transfer of wealth from the poorest to the richest. And the medical bodies do not engage with the economic and societal structures that cause the problems. They just highlight the problems and walk away, hoping that the leaderships might get some honor bestowed on them for keeping quiet.
Wow. And I mean, it's incredible to think that this epidemic of mental health is going on, and those at the top are just not actually pushing for change. How about the drug companies? I mean, do they make a lot of money from these antidepressants that are being administered?
Before I move on to that, I think it's important to understand that, we are constantly made aware of mental health. We need to be more sympathetic to each other and understand this is a problem. But the very same organizations that are raising awareness are causing the problem. So this is a form of gaslighting. You're creating people, you're telling people go and seek help, only for them to find out there's inadequate help. Now that's a form of psychological warfare against these people, right? So that's one issue. The vast majority of antidepressant prescribing in general practice is for generic drugs. So there's not really much of a markup for the companies. They've already taken their profit out when these drugs are under patent. The patents last for anything up to 10 years. The patents expire, then you get the generic drug. So the money is not there, but there is money in the higher end of mental health disease, in psychotic disease, where you have these new antipsychotic drugs that come out, which are very expensive, but that's only treating the people with the most serious mental health disorders. But, we have societal-wide gaslighting. We have, medical education, which is making us aspire to deliver excellent care and all these guidelines and pathways, but they do not give us the resources to do it.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a story that's going to go on. And thank you for coming on and explaining it so well. You must be under a lot of stress as a GP with what's happening.
Yeah, the reason I keep going, I come from a working class background. I can remember, back in the 80s when we had a government induced recession, and we had days where we had to make 2 days food, 1 day's food lasts for 2 or 3 days. I remember that. I remember the hunger. I haven't abandoned my roots like many people do and assume that the reason they've succeeded in life or become comfortable is down to their own innate abilities. The only reason I got through medical school because I had a fully funded education. I got a student grant and I left university with no debt. That's what I want to restore for everybody else wanting to get into higher education. We need to restore that. We can afford it, and we need to call out clearly, as Prem has done, but as the shadow cabinet fails to do, that this is a class war. This is an economic wealth transfer, which is causing untold harm. And we have our hospital corridors full of people who are dying preventably. How much more of this are we going to take?